Master word list. Words starting with letter O. Oaf means stupid, awkward person. For example, watch what you're doing, you clumsy oaf, Bill shouted at the waiter who had drenched him with iced coffee. Obdurate means stubborn. For example, he was obdurate in his refusal to listen to our complaints. Obese means fat. For example, it is advisable that obese people try to lose weight. Obfuscate means confuse, make needlessly complex. For example, was the president's spokesman trying to clarify the Whitewater mystery, or was he trying to obfuscate the issue so the voters would never figure out what went on? Obituary means death notice. For example, I first learned of her death when I read the obituary column in the newspaper. Objective means not influenced by emotions, fair. For example, even though he was her son, she tried to be objective about his behavior. Objective means goal, aim. For example, a degree in medicine was her ultimate objective. Obligatory means binding, required. For example, it is obligatory that books borrowed from the library be returned within 2 weeks. Oblique means indirect, slanting. For example, casting a quick, oblique glance at the reviewing stand, the sergeant ordered the company to march oblique right. Obliterate means destroy completely. For example, the tidal wave obliterated several island villages. Oblivion means forgetfulness. For example, after a decade of popularity, Hurston's works had fallen into oblivion, no one bothered to read them anymore. Oblivious means inattentive or unmindful. For example, deep in her book, Nancy was oblivious to the noisy squabbles of her brother and his friends. Obnoxious means offensive. For example, I find your behavior obnoxious, please mend your ways. Obscure means vague, unclear. For example, even after I read the poem a 4th time, its meaning was still obscure. Obscure means make unclear. For example, at times he seemed purposely to obscure his meaning, preferring mystery to clarity. Obsequious means slavishly attentive. For example, Helen liked to be served by people who behaved as if they respected themselves. Nothing irritated her more than an excessively obsequious waiter or a fawning sales clerk. Obsessive means related to thinking about something constantly. For example, ballet, which had been a hobby, began to dominate his life. His love of dancing became obsessive. Obsolete means no longer useful. For example, the invention of the pocket calculator made the slide rule used by generations of engineers obsolete. Obstetrician means physician specializing in delivery of babies. For example, in modern times, the delivery of children has passed from the midwife to the more scientifically trained obstetrician. Obstinate means stubborn, hard to control. For example, we tried to persuade him to give up smoking, but he was obstinate and refused to change. Obstreperous means noisy. For example, what do you do when an obstreperous horde of drunken policemen goes carousing through your hotel, crashing into potted plants and singing vulgar songs? Obtrude means push forward or intrude. For example, because Fanny was reluctant to obtrude her opinions about child raising upon her daughter-in-law, she kept a close watch on her tongue. Obtuse means blunt, stupid. For example, what can you do with somebody who's so obtuse that he can't even tell that you're insulting him? Obviate means make unnecessary, get rid of. For example, I hope this contribution will obviate any need for further collections of funds. Odious means hateful. For example, Cinderella's ugly stepsisters had the odious habit of popping their zits in public. Odium means hatefulness, disrepute. For example, Prince Charming could not express the odium he felt towards Cinderella's stepsisters because of their mistreatment of poor Cinderella. Odorous means having an odor. For example, this variety of hybrid tea rose is more odorous than the one you have in your garden. Odyssey means long, eventful journey. For example, the refugees' journey from Cambodia was a terrifying odyssey. Offensive means attacking, insulting. For example, getting into street brawls is no minor matter for professional boxers, who are required by law to restrict their offensive impulses to the ring. Offhand means casual. For example, expecting to be treated with due propriety by her hosts, Great Aunt Maud was offended by their offhand manner. Officious means excessively pushy in offering one's services. For example, Judy wanted to look over the new computer models on her own, but the officious salesman kept on butting in with helpful advice until she was ready to walk out of the store. Ogle means make eyes at. For example, at the coffee house, Walter was too shy to ogle the pretty girls openly. Instead, he peeked out at them from behind a rubber plant. Olfactory means concerning the sense of smell. For example, a wine taster must have a discriminating palate and a keen olfactory sense, for a good wine appeals both to the taste buds and to the nose. Oligarchy means government by a privileged few. For example, one small clique ran the student council. What had been intended as a democratic governing body had turned into an oligarchy. Ominous means threatening. For example, those clouds are ominous, they suggest a severe storm is on the way. Omnipotent means all-powerful. For example, the monarch regarded himself as omnipotent and responsible to no one for his acts. Omnipresent means universally present. For example, on Christmas Eve, Santa Claus is omnipresent. Omniscient means all-knowing. For example, I do not pretend to be omniscient, but I am positive about this fact. Omnivorous means eating both plant and animal food. For example, some animals, including man, are omnivorous and eat both meat and vegetables. Others are either carnivorous or herbivorous. Onerous means burdensome. For example, he asked for an assistant because his workload was too onerous. Onset means beginning attack. For example, caught unprepared by the sudden onset of the storm, we rushed around the house closing windows and bringing the garden furniture into shelter. Onus means burden, responsibility. For example, the emperor was spared the onus of signing the surrender papers. Instead, he relegated the assignment to his generals. Opalescent means lustrous. For example, the oil slick on the water had an opalescent, rainbow-like sheen. Opaque means dark, not transparent. For example, the opaque window shade kept the sunlight out of the room. Opiate means medicine to induce sleep. For example, to say that religion is the opiate of the people is to condemn religion as a drug that keeps the people quiet and submissive to those in power. Opportune means timely, well-chosen. For example, Sally looked at her father struggling to balance his checkbook. Clearly this would not be an opportune moment to ask him for a raise in her allowance. Opportunist means individual who sacrifices principles by taking advantage of circumstances. For example, Joe is such an opportunist that he tripled the price of bottled water at his store as soon as the earthquake struck. Optician means maker and seller of eyeglasses. For example, the patient took the prescription given him by his oculist to the optician. Optimist means person who looks on the good side. For example, the pessimist says the glass is half empty, the optimist says it is half full. Optimum means most favorable. For example, if you wait for the optimum moment to act, you may never begin your project. Optional means not obligatory. For example, most colleges require applicants to submit SATI scores. At some colleges, however, submitting SATI scores is optional. Opulence means extreme wealth. For example, the glitter and opulence of the ballroom took Cinderella's breath away. Opus means work. For example, although many critics hailed his Fifth Symphony as his major work, he did not regard it as his major opus. Oracular means uttered as if with divine authority. For example, like many others who sought divine guidance from the oracle at Delphi, Oedipus could not understand the enigmatic oracular warning he received. Orator means public speaker. For example, the abolitionist Frederick Douglass was a brilliant orator whose speeches brought home to his audience the evils of slavery. Ordain means decree or command. For example, the king ordained that no foreigner should be allowed to enter the city. Ordeal means severe trial or affliction. For example, June was so painfully shy that it was an ordeal for her to speak up when the teacher called on her in class. Ordinance means decree. For example, passing a red light is a violation of a city ordinance. Ordination means ceremony making someone a minister. For example, at the young priest's ordination, the members of the congregation presented him with a set of vestments. Orgy means wild, drunken revelry. For example, when her income tax refund check finally arrived, Sally indulged in an orgy of shopping. Orient means get one's bearings, adjust. For example, Philip spent his first day in Denver orienting himself to the city. Orientation means act of finding oneself in society. For example, freshman orientation provides the incoming students with an opportunity to learn about their new environment and their place in it. Ornate means excessively or elaborately decorated. For example, with its elaborately carved, convoluted lines, furniture of the Baroque period was highly ornate. Ornithologist means scientific student of birds. For example, Audubon's drawings of American birdlife have been of interest not only to the ornithologists but also to the general public. Ornithology means study of birds. For example, Audubon's studies of American birds greatly influenced the course of ornithology. Orthodox means traditional, conservative. For example, faced with a problem, he preferred to take an orthodox approach rather than shock anyone. Oscillate means vibrate. For example, it is interesting to note how public opinion oscillates between the extremes of optimism and pessimism. Ossify means change or harden into bone. For example, when he called his opponent a bonehead, he implied that his adversary's brain had ossified to the point that he was incapable of clear thinking. Ostensible means apparent, pretended. For example, although the ostensible purpose of this expedition is to discover new lands, we are really interested in finding new markets for our products. Ostentatious means showy, pretentious. For example, Donald Trump's latest casino in Atlantic City is the most ostentatious gambling palace in the East. It easily outglitters its competitors. Ostracize means exclude from public favor, ban. For example, as soon as the newspapers carried the story of his connection with the criminals, his friends began to ostracize him. Oust means expel, drive out. For example, the world wondered if Aquino would be able to oust Marcos from office. Outlandish means bizarre, peculiar. For example, the eccentric professor who engages in markedly outlandish behavior is a stock figure in novels with an academic setting. Outmoded means longer, stylish, old-fashioned. For example, unconcerned about keeping in style, Lenore was perfectly happy to wear outmoded clothes as long as they were clean and unfrayed. Outskirts means outer borders. For example, we lived not in central London, but in one of those peripheral suburbs that spring up on the outskirts of a great city. Outspoken means candid, blunt. For example, The candidate was too outspoken to be a successful politician. He had not yet learned to weigh his words carefully. Outstrip means surpass, outdo. For example, Jesse Owens easily outstripped his white competitors to win the gold medal at the Olympic Games. Outwit means outsmart, trick. For example, by disguising himself as an old woman, Holmes was able to outwit his pursuers and escape capture. Ovation means enthusiastic applause. For example, when the popular tenor Placido Domingo came on stage in the first act of La Bohème, he was greeted by a tremendous ovation. Overbearing means bossy and arrogant. For example, certain of her own importance, and of the unimportance of everyone else, Lady Bracknell was intolerably overbearing in her manner. Overt means open to view. For example, according to the United States Constitution, a person must commit an overt act before he may be tried for treason. Overwrought means extremely agitated. For example, when Kate heard the news of the sudden tragedy, she became too overwrought to work and had to leave the office early. End of the word list with words starting with letter O.